Before we begin, if you're new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It helps more than you know, and it keeps these stories coming. I still remember the exact smell of that evening. Garlic and rosemary. I had spent 2 hours cooking his favorite meal, lamb chops with roasted vegetables, because that was the kind of wife I was, the kind who remembered, the kind who tried. My name is Claire Whitfield. I was 38 years old, a senior financial analyst at a mid-sized investment firm in Austin, Texas, and I had been married to Derek Whitfield for 10 years, a decade, long enough to build a life, long enough to believe it was real. Derek came home at 8:47 p.m. I know the exact time because I had checked my phone 3 times, wondering why he wasn't answering my messages. He walked through the door with that particular looseness in his shoulders, the kind that only comes when someone has already made a decision and is simply waiting to deliver it. He didn't sit down for dinner. He stood in the middle of our kitchen, still wearing his coat, and told me he was leaving. Not we need to talk. Not I've been struggling. Just leaving. Her name was Tiffany, 24 years old. She worked as a marketing coordinator at the tech startup, where Derek had recently been named Chief Operations Officer. He told me she made him feel alive again. He actually used that word, alive, as if the 10 years we had built together were nothing more than a slow suffocation he had finally escaped. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the lamb chops across the room, though part of me wanted to. I stood very still by the stove and looked at the man I had supported through 2 job losses, 1 failed business venture, and his mother's long illness. The man whose career I had helped rebuild with my own contacts, my own reputation, my own relentless belief in him. I looked at him and asked one question. Is she pregnant? He said no, as if that made it better. He was out of the house within a week. He took his clothes, his golf clubs, and the confidence that 10 years of my loyalty had built inside him. He left me the mortgage, the silence, and a grief so dense it had physical weight. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. Derek's attorney was aggressive. Mine was better. I walked away with the house, a clean financial settlement, and something far more valuable than either: absolute clarity. I knew exactly who Derek Whitfield was now. And more importantly, I was beginning to understand exactly who I was. The woman standing in that kitchen, plate in hand, was gone. What rose in her place was something quieter, something patient, something he should have been terrified of. Derek did not grieve. That was the first thing I noticed. Within 6 weeks of moving out, he had rebranded himself entirely. New apartment in the Domain, the most expensive zip code in Austin, new wardrobe, new gym routine that he documented on Instagram with the frequency of a man who needed the world to witness his reinvention. And Tiffany, always Tiffany. She was photographed beside him at restaurant openings, rooftop parties, charity galas he had never once expressed interest in attending during our marriage. She wore dresses that cost more than our first car payment. She laughed with her whole face in every photo, the unguarded laugh of someone who has never been handed a bill she had to figure out how to pay. I watched all of it from a careful distance, not out of obsession, out of study, because in those early months after the divorce, while Derek was performing his spectacular new life for an audience of LinkedIn connections and Instagram followers, I was doing something he had never once credited me with the capacity to do. I was building. I had spent a decade as a financial analyst. I understood markets, I understood risk, and more than anything, I understood leverage. What I had never done was apply that knowledge entirely for myself. I had always been supporting someone else's vision. Derek's businesses, Derek's career pivots, Derek's confidence. That ended the night he stood in our kitchen in his coat. I began quietly. A series of calculated investments through a private LLC I registered under a name that meant nothing to anyone: Northgate Capital Strategies. I pulled in 2 former colleagues I trusted completely, a risk analyst named Paul Okafor and a contracts attorney named Linda Shen. Neither of them knew the full scope of what I was planning. They didn't need to. What I needed was infrastructure, and I was building it brick by brick. Meanwhile, Derek's firm, a mid-level operations consulting company called Whitfield & Grove, was expanding aggressively. He had taken on 3 major clients in the logistics sector and leveraged the contracts to secure significant business loans. On paper, he looked unstoppable. I knew better. I had helped him write his first business plan. I knew how Derek operated. Big bets, minimum reserves, maximum exposure. He had always confused momentum with stability. He mistook speed for strategy. While he celebrated at rooftop bars with Tiffany on his arm, I was reading every financial filing his company made. I was tracking his debt ratios. I was watching, with the calm precision of someone who had learned patience the hard way, for the first crack to appear. It took 14 months, but it appeared, and when it did, I was already holding everything I needed. The crack, when it finally showed, was not dramatic at first. It rarely is. In the spring of that second year, the logistics sector took a significant hit. 3 of Derek's largest clients, all interconnected in a supply chain network he had never bothered to fully map, began pulling back contracts simultaneously. It was the kind of cascade failure that any competent analyst would have modeled as a risk scenario. Derek had not. I watched the filings change in real time. His revenue projections dropped. His loan obligations didn't. Whitfield & Grove had expanded its office space 6 months earlier, signing a 5-year commercial lease on a floor in a glass tower downtown, the kind of address designed to impress clients rather than serve operations. That lease was now an anchor around the company's neck. Derek responded the way he always responded to pressure, with performance. He gave interviews to 2 local business publications about strategic evolution and pivoting with agility. He posted on LinkedIn about embracing challenge as a catalyst for growth. He smiled in photographs. Behind the smile, the company was hemorrhaging. Paul flagged it first. He sent me a single message. The window is opening. I had already seen it. Through Northgate Capital Strategies, I had spent the previous 8 months quietly acquiring debt positions connected to 2 of Whitfield & Grove's primary creditors. It was a painstaking process, entirely legal, entirely invisible, and entirely deliberate. By the time Derek realized his company was in genuine danger, I was already positioned at the table. The bankruptcy filing came on a Tuesday morning in April. I remember reading the notification on my laptop at my kitchen table, the same kitchen where he had stood in his coat and told me he was leaving. I had remodeled it since then. New countertops, better light. It felt like mine now in a way it never had when we shared it. I set down my coffee and read the filing carefully. Whitfield & Grove. Total liabilities significantly exceeding assets. Primary creditors listed. Assets available for acquisition listed separately. Among those assets, the office lease, the company equipment, the client contracts still in play, and the physical location, the glass tower floor downtown that Derek had signed with such pride. I picked up my phone and called Linda Shen. "It's time," I said. She already had the documents prepared. Within 72 hours, through a series of transactions that were clean, legal, and completely untraceable back to me personally, Northgate Capital Strategies had acquired the primary assets of the former Whitfield & Grove, including the office, including the contracts, including every square foot of that glass tower floor where Derek had built the illusion of his empire. I now owned it. All of it. And Derek didn't know my name was anywhere near it. I had one rule for what came next. No theatrics. This was not a movie. I was not interested in dramatic speeches or manufactured moments of humiliation. What I wanted was something far more precise. I wanted Derek to walk into the consequences of his own choices and understand, without any help from me, exactly where he had arrived. I restructured the acquired assets under a new operational entity, Northgate Advisory Group. I brought in 2 new staff members, updated the office interiors, nothing extravagant, just functional and sharp, and began the process of relaunching the space as a legitimate consulting operation. Then I posted the job listings. We needed administrative coordinators, a junior analyst, a facilities manager, and, this is the part that required the most careful legal review from Linda, a general maintenance and janitorial services contractor, a real position, fair wage, standard contract, everything above board. I did not contact Derek directly. I didn't need to. He had been networking desperately since the bankruptcy became public. His LinkedIn had shifted tone almost overnight, less triumphant, more searching. He was reaching out to former contacts, attending every professional mixer in Austin, trying to reposition himself as a turnaround specialist who had learned from a difficult market cycle. It was Paul who told me Derek had applied. Not for the janitorial position. Not yet. He had submitted his resume for a senior operations consultant role that we had quietly listed alongside the other positions. The resume was polished. The cover letter was confident. He had no idea who owned the company. I scheduled his interview personally, I was not in the room when he arrived. I watched through the interior window of my office as he walked through the front door, the same door that had once been his. He was dressed well, charcoal suit, the kind he favored. He carried himself with the residual posture of a man who had not yet fully accepted what had happened to him. My operations manager, a sharp woman named Grace Obi, greeted him and led him to the conference room. I gave him 20 minutes. Then I walked in. The look on Derek's face when he saw me sit down at the head of that table, I've replayed it many times since. It was not one single expression. It moved through several in the space of about 4 seconds. Recognition, confusion, a rapid and visible attempt at composure. "Claire," he said. "Mr. Whitfield," I replied. I opened the folder in front of me and explained in calm and professional language that the senior consultant position had been filled internally. However, I told him, there was one contract still available, if he was interested in reviewing it. I slid the document across the table. He looked down at it. His jaw tightened. It was the janitorial services contract. Minimum wage, standard hours, full details. I folded my hands and waited. He took the contract home, he said, to review it. That was a Thursday. By Saturday morning, Derek Whitfield had signed it and returned it by email. No negotiating, no counteroffer. Just a scanned signature at the bottom of the page and a message that said only, "Please confirm start date." I had Linda review it one final time. Everything was clean. His first day was a Monday. I was in early, as I always am. I watched from my office window as Derek arrived at 7:52 a.m., 8 minutes before his scheduled start. Whatever else I could say about him, he had never been late to anything professional. That much, at least, had not changed. Grace met him at the reception desk and walked him to the supply room. I had made no special arrangements, no adjustments to standard procedure. He would be treated exactly as any other contracted staff member, with professionalism and basic respect. That was non-negotiable for me. This was never about cruelty. It was about truth. The uniform was standard issue, dark navy work pants, a matching shirt with the Northgate logo on the chest, practical boots. I had not chosen it to humiliate him. It was simply what the position required. But I will not pretend I was unaware of what it meant. This man who had spent years in tailored suits, who had measured his identity in business-class flights and corner offices, pulling on a work shirt with someone else's company name stitched above his heart. I passed the supply room once that morning, intentionally. He was tucking in the shirt. He saw me. I gave him a brief professional nod and kept walking. By 9 a.m., he was mopping the hallway outside the conference room where, 14 months earlier, Whitfield and Grove had hosted its last client presentation. I had a meeting at 10. As my team filed into the conference room, I noticed Derek working near the far end of the corridor. He kept his head down. His movements were efficient. He was not a man who did anything carelessly, even this. At lunch, one of my junior analysts asked me quietly if the new maintenance contractor was who he thought he was. I told him it didn't matter. Everyone on this floor was to be treated with basic courtesy. That was the standard, and I expected it to be maintained. He nodded and didn't ask again. By the end of that first week, Derek had settled into a rhythm. He arrived on time, completed his assignments, and left without incident. He did not complain. He did not make excuses. And Tiffany, I had learned through the Austin Professional Network that talks more than it realizes. Tiffany had left him 2 months after the bankruptcy filing. Apparently, he no longer made her feel alive. There is something about a building that holds its history. I felt it every time I walked past Derek in those corridors. Not nostalgia. Nothing as soft as that. Something closer to vertigo. The dissonance of watching a man push a cleaning cart through the same hallways, where he had once commanded rooms full of people who believed in him, where I had believed in him. I caught myself studying him sometimes, from a distance. The way he moved. Efficient, head down, methodical. He had always been methodical. It was one of the things I had admired about him in the early years. Now that same quality felt like a rebuke, because it meant he was enduring this the same way he had endured everything. By simply continuing to move forward without ever truly looking at what he had left behind. I wanted him to look. I won't pretend otherwise. I wanted, at least once, to see him stop in the middle of that corridor and fully reckon with what he was standing in the middle of, not collapse. I didn't need collapse, just recognition, the kind that lands in the chest and stays there. One afternoon, I was reviewing contracts at my desk when Grace knocked and told me there had been a minor issue. Derek had found a water leak under the kitchen sink and had flagged it before it caused any damage. She said he had handled it calmly and professionally. I thanked her. She left. I sat with that for a long time. He had protected my building, instinctively, efficiently, without being asked. And I didn't know what to do with that, whether it made me feel better or worse or something I didn't have a clean name for. My closest friend Brenda asked me that week how I was actually feeling, not about the business, about this, about having him here. I told her the truth. Some days it felt like justice. Other days it felt like I was standing too close to something I should have already walked away from. Those two things can both be true, she said. She was right, and that was the most uncomfortable part of all. I stopped sleeping well in the 5th week, not because of Derek, or not entirely. It was something larger than him, something I kept circling in the dark at 3 a.m. when the office building was empty, and Austin was quiet, and there was nothing left to analyze or manage or control. I had built everything I set out to build. The company was real, the numbers were honest, and the respect I saw in my team's faces every morning was not the kind that could be faked or bought. I had done this, fully, cleanly, from nothing but my own mind, and the skills I had spent a decade deploying for someone else. So why did I still feel like I was waiting for something? I went back to the basics, the thing I always did when I couldn't think my way through a problem. I ran. Early mornings, before the city woke up, I ran along the trail near my house, and I let my mind do whatever it needed to do without interference. What it kept returning to was the kitchen, not Derek standing in it. Me, standing beside the stove with a plate in my hand, utterly still, while everything I had built my life around dissolved in real time. The stillness of that moment had always struck me as strange. I had expected to shatter, and instead I had simply stopped. Like a clock that needed rewinding. What I understood now, running in the dark at 5 a.m., was that the stillness had not been weakness. It had been the first moment of my real life, everything before it, the accommodating, the shrinking, the endless redirecting of my own intelligence toward someone else's ambitions. That had been the performance. The night Derek left was not the night my life ended. It was the night the performance finally did. My mother called that Sunday, as she always did. I told her I wasn't sleeping well. She asked if I was happy. I almost said yes automatically, and then I stopped, because it wasn't quite right. What I felt was more unsettled than happy, more raw, more alive in the complicated way that comes when you are genuinely in the middle of something that matters. I feel like I'm becoming someone, I told her, and it's uncomfortable. She laughed softly. That's exactly what it's supposed to feel like, she said. I ran an extra mile that morning. 6 weeks into Derek's contract, I called a full staff and stakeholder meeting. It was a legitimate business event. Quarterly review, forward projections, introduction of 2 new advisory board members I had recruited from the Dallas financial sector. Nothing about it was staged for Derek's benefit, but I would be dishonest if I said I was unaware of the optics. The meeting was held in the main conference room, the one with the long glass table and the view of the Austin skyline that Derek had specifically selected when he signed the lease. At 8 a.m., Grace coordinated the room setup. Fresh water, printed materials, the projector aligned. Derek's morning assignment included the conference room corridor and the adjacent kitchen. He would be working within 30 feet of the meeting for most of its duration. I opened the session at 9 a.m. with 12 people around that table. Investors, advisors, department leads. I walked through Northgate's performance metrics for the quarter. Revenue up, client retention strong, 2 new contracts signed. The numbers were honest and they were good. Midway through the presentation, I saw Derek through the glass partition, moving his cart slowly past the corridor. He paused briefly, just a fraction of a second, and I think he could see the room through the glass. The table, the people, the presentation on the screen behind me. I did not look away from my slides. I finished the presentation, answered questions, and closed the meeting 40 minutes later with a clear outline of our goals for the following quarter. The room applauded. Not dramatically, just the brief, genuine acknowledgement of a team that believed in where it was headed. Afterward, as people filed out and Grace collected the materials, one of the new advisory board members stopped beside me and said, "You've built something impressive here, Claire. Very few people do this cleanly." I thanked him. When I walked out of the conference room, Derek was wiping down the kitchen counter at the end of the hall. He had his back to me. I said nothing. Neither did he. But I noticed his shoulders, the set of them, the way they carried a weight that had not been there in those Instagram photos from 2 years ago. The weight of understanding. Not shame, I didn't think. Something more durable than shame. Reckoning. The contract renewal landed on my desk on a Monday. I stared at it for longer than I should have. 3 months. It had been 3 months of Derek Whitfield working in my building, and now I had to decide whether to extend it. And I could not, for the first time in 2 years, immediately identify what the right answer was. Professionally, the case was neutral. He had been reliable. No complaints, no incidents, no drama. Grace had noted on his performance log, with her characteristic precision, performs duties adequately, no issues. 4 words that would have destroyed him 18 months ago. Personally, it was more complicated than I wanted to admit. I had told myself this was about completion, about closing the loop, but sitting at my desk with that contract in front of me, I had to be honest. I didn't feel complete. I felt stuck, like I was still in that kitchen, still holding the plate, still waiting for something that was never going to arrive. Brenda came over Wednesday night. She brought wine, and the particular expression she wears when she has already decided what she thinks and is simply waiting for you to catch up. She looked at the contract on my coffee table. "Claire," she said, "what are you still trying to prove? And to who?" The question hit harder than I expected. I had proven the business. I had proven the strategy. I had proven, beyond any reasonable doubt, that I was not the woman he had discarded. I had proven all of that. To myself, which was the only audience that ever mattered, but I had kept him here, and the only honest reason left was one I didn't like looking at directly. I had wanted him to see it. Every single day. I had wanted his presence in my building to be a daily confirmation that I had won. And somewhere in the past 3 months, that need had quietly become a cage. Not for him, but for me. I picked up the contract. I called Linda the next morning. 30 days notice. Full final payment. Clean reference. No punishment, no reward. Simply the professional close of a professional arrangement. When Grace handed him the termination letter, I was in my office with the door open. I watched him read it at the front desk. His expression didn't change dramatically, just a slight shift around the eyes. Something that might have been relief, or resignation, or both. He folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket. And I finally exhaled. I am writing this on a Thursday morning, sitting at my desk on the 4th floor of a building I own. The Austin skyline stretches out beyond the window, clean and sharp in the early light. There is coffee getting cold beside my keyboard because I keep forgetting to drink it, which has always been a sign that I am genuinely absorbed in something. Northgate Advisory Group closed its most profitable quarter last month. Paul has been promoted to managing director. Linda is expanding our legal services division. Grace runs operations with a precision that makes my job easier every single day. We are hiring 3 new analysts in the spring. I am 40 years old. I own this floor. I own the company. I own the life I built from the rubble of a night when a man stood in my kitchen in his coat and thought he was discarding something ordinary. Derek Whitfield, I have heard, relocated to San Antonio. He is working in a mid-level operations role at a distribution company there. I have no feelings about this that I can honestly describe as strong. I hope he has found something real, not for his sake particularly, but because people who are genuinely at peace tend to stay out of other people's lives. Tiffany, I am told, is engaged to someone in tech. I wish her the practical wisdom that only experience can deliver. As for me, I went on a trip to Portugal last fall, alone, deliberately. I spent 2 weeks walking through Lisbon and the Douro Valley, eating well, reading in the evenings, and feeling, for the first time in longer than I can accurately measure, entirely like myself. On the last evening, sitting at a small table outside a restaurant in Porto, watching the light go gold over the river, I understood something I had been circling for 2 years. The best revenge is not watching someone suffer. It is waking up in a life so fully your own that you genuinely forget to be angry. I picked up my wine glass. I did not make a toast to Derek. I made it to the woman who stayed very still by the stove that night and did not scream and did not break and started building the very next morning. That woman deserved every bit of what came after. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. that genuinely means the world. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in Claire's place? Would you have walked away, or would you have taken the building too? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if you have a story, something you've lived, witnessed, or imagined, leave it in the comments. Your idea could become the next video. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss what's coming next. Because next time, the betrayal starts even earlier than you think, and so does the plan. See you then.